You planted your seeds, waited patiently, and nothing came up. It happens to almost every gardener at some point, and the frustration is real. After 3 decades of starting seeds, I can tell you the problem is almost always one of 14 specific mistakes. Today, we are walking through each one so you can diagnose exactly what went wrong and fix it for good. Stay until the end, because number 13 catches more gardeners off guard than you would expect. And the bonus tip might just change how you approach seed starting forever. The first fatal mistake, and honestly the most common one I see, is planting seeds too deep. This single error has crushed more beginner gardeners than almost anything else. Here is what happens. Every seed contains a tiny embryo with a limited energy reserve. That energy has to power the seedling upward through the soil until it reaches light and can start photosynthesizing. When you bury a seed too deep, it simply runs out of fuel before it ever breaks the surface. Small seeds like lettuce, carrots, celery, petunias, and snapdragons are especially vulnerable because they have almost no stored energy to begin with. The general rule is to plant a seed at a depth of about 2 to 3 times its own diameter. For tiny seeds, that means barely covering them, or even just pressing them onto the soil surface. If your seed packet says to surface sow, take that instruction seriously. Those seeds often need light to trigger germination in the first place, and burying them guarantees failure. The second mistake that devastates seed starting efforts is ignoring soil temperature. Most gardeners obsess over air temperature, but your seeds do not care what the thermometer on your porch says. They care about the temperature of the soil they are sitting in. Every seed species has a specific range where germination happens, and outside that window, things go wrong fast. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, melons, and squash all need warm soil, typically between 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Plant them in 50-degree soil, and they will sit there rotting instead of sprouting. This catches gardeners in zones 3 through 6 every spring when excitement leads to premature planting. On the flip side, soil that gets too hot, above 95 degrees for most vegetables, will actually kill the embryo inside the seed. The fix is simple, but requires a small investment. Get an inexpensive soil thermometer and actually use it. For warm season crops started indoors, a heat mat makes all the difference. Match your soil temperature to your seed requirements, and you eliminate one of the most misunderstood variables in the entire germination process. The third fatal mistake is overwatering, and this one specifically targets the most attentive gardeners. You want your seeds to succeed, so you keep the soil moist. Then, a little more moist. Then, constantly wet. And suddenly, nothing germinates. Here's the science. Seeds need moisture to trigger germination, but they also need oxygen. When soil becomes waterlogged, water fills every air pocket and literally suffocates the seed. Within 48 hours, fungal pathogens move in and rot sets in. Beans, peas, sunflowers, zucchini, and corn are especially vulnerable because their larger seeds sit in the soil longer and absorb more water. Gardeners in humid zones 7 through 10 struggle with this most because the environment already works against quick drying. The goal is consistent moisture, not saturation. Your starting mix should feel like a wrung-out sponge, damp throughout, but never dripping. If you squeeze a handful and water runs out, it is too wet. Good drainage is essential, which means containers need drainage holes and outdoor beds need to drain freely. When in doubt, let the surface dry slightly between waterings, rather than adding more. Now, if you're finding this video helpful so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this video reach more gardeners, like yourself, who would also find this information helpful. All right, let's continue. The fourth mistake catches even experienced gardeners completely off guard, and that is using old or non-viable seeds. You do everything right. Perfect depth, ideal temperature, careful watering, and still nothing emerges. The problem is that those seeds were dead before you ever put them in the soil. Seed viability drops dramatically over time, and the rate varies wildly by species. Onion, parsnip, leek, parsley, and spinach seeds are notorious for short shelf lives, often losing significant germination rates after just 1 to 2 years. Meanwhile, tomato and cucumber seeds can remain viable for 5 years or more under good conditions. The frustrating part is there is no visual difference between a viable seed and a dead one. They look identical. This leads gardeners down endless rabbit holes, troubleshooting their technique, when the seeds were the culprit all along. Before planting older seeds, run a simple germination test. Place 10 seeds on a damp paper towel, seal it in a plastic bag, and keep it warm for the expected germination period. Count how many sprout. If only 3 of 10 germinate, you know to plant heavily or buy fresh seed. This one test can save an entire growing season. The fifth fatal mistake is the opposite of overwatering but equally destructive, and that is inconsistent moisture or underwatering. Seeds require continuous moisture during germination because the process is irreversible once it starts. When a seed absorbs water, it triggers a cascade of chemical reactions that wake up the embryo. If the seed dries out after this process begins, the embryo dies. There is no restarting. Carrots, parsley, celery, and parsnips are the biggest victims here because they take 14 to 21 days to germinate. That is 3 weeks where the soil must stay consistently moist, and most gardeners lose patience or get inconsistent. Gardeners in arid zones 7 through 10 face the greatest challenge because low humidity and wind dry out soil surfaces rapidly. The solution is not to water more heavily, but to water more frequently and lightly, or to use moisture retention strategies. Covering seed trays with humidity domes or plastic wrap until germination occurs keeps moisture stable. For direct sown seeds outdoors, a light layer of vermiculite or fine compost over the row helps retain moisture at the surface. Check your seed starting area at least twice daily during the germination window. Once you understand that a single dry period can be fatal, you will never approach watering the same way again. The sixth mistake is one that outdoor direct sowers encounter constantly, and that is compacted or crusted soil. You plant your seeds at the perfect depth, water carefully, and wait. But the soil surface bakes in the sun and forms a hard crust, or heavy clay compacts into something resembling concrete. Either way, your seedlings are trapped. Young sprouts have almost no physical strength. They rely on the soil being loose enough to push through as they emerge. When they hit a hardpan layer or a sealed crust, they exhaust their energy reserves pushing against an immovable barrier and die underground. Carrots, lettuce, beans, and beets are frequently lost this way. Clay-heavy regions see this problem most often, but any garden bed can crust over after heavy watering or rain followed by sun exposure. Prevention is easier than correction. Amend heavy soils with compost to improve structure before planting. After sowing, cover seeds with a light seed starting mix or vermiculite, instead of packing the native soil back over them. If you notice crusting forming, gently break it up with a hand rake before seedlings are due to emerge. Sometimes, germination failure is not about the seed at all. It is about what is sitting on top of it. The seventh mistake involves something many gardeners never even consider, and that is ignoring light requirements for germination. We tend to think seeds just need moisture and warmth, but some seeds have a third requirement that is absolutely non-negotiable, and that is specific light conditions. Lettuce, petunia, and snapdragon seeds require light exposure to trigger germination. If you cover them with soil, even a thin layer, they will not sprout. The light signal tells them they are near the surface where survival is possible. On the other hand, tomatoes, peppers, and onions require darkness to germinate. Exposing them to light by leaving them uncovered or using transparent containers can inhibit the process. This information is almost always on the seed packet, but gardeners frequently overlook it or assume all seeds work the same way. When you are dealing with light-requiring seeds, simply press them onto the surface of moist starting mix without covering. Mist gently to ensure good seed-to-soil contact. For dark-requiring seeds, cover them appropriately and consider using opaque covers on your trays until sprouts appear. Matching light conditions to seed requirements is one of the easiest fixes in all of seed, starting once you know to look for it. The eighth mistake primarily affects gardeners trying to grow native plants, perennials, or fruit trees from seed, and that is skipping cold stratification. Many seeds, especially those from temperate climates, have built-in dormancy mechanisms that prevent germination until they have experienced winter. This is nature's way of ensuring seeds do not sprout during a fall warm spell only to be killed by winter. Lavender, echinacea, milkweed, most native wildflowers, and fruit tree seeds all fall into this category. Without 30 to 90 days of cold, moist conditions that simulate winter, these seeds will simply sit in your soil indefinitely. Gardeners in zones 3 through 7 who want to grow native perennials encounter this constantly. You plant the seeds, nothing happens, and you assume they were bad, when really they were waiting for a winter that never came. The fix is straightforward but requires planning. Place seeds in a damp paper towel inside a sealed bag and refrigerate them for the recommended stratification period before planting. Alternatively, direct sow in late fall and let nature provide the cold treatment over winter. Check seed packets and species requirements carefully. If stratification is needed and skipped, no amount of perfect technique will make those seeds germinate. The ninth fatal mistake has destroyed more seedlings than perhaps any other, and that is damping off disease. This fungal condition is particularly cruel because it often strikes after germination, just when you think you have succeeded. One day, you have healthy seedlings, and the next morning they have collapsed at the soil line, stems pinched and withered. Damping off is caused by several soil-borne fungal pathogens, including Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and Fusarium. They thrive in cool, humid, poorly ventilated conditions with wet soil surfaces. Brassicas, tomatoes, and peppers are frequent victims, but no seedling is immune. The pathogens can also attack seeds before they ever emerge, causing pre-emergence damping off that looks like simple germination failure. Prevention is your only real defense because once infection occurs, affected seedlings cannot be saved. Use a sterile seed starting mix, not garden soil. Ensure containers are clean and have drainage holes. Provide air circulation with a small fan on low. Avoid overwatering and allow soil surfaces to dry slightly between waterings. Bottom watering helps keep the surface drier. Some gardeners sprinkle a thin layer of cinnamon on the soil surface as a natural antifungal. If damping off hits, remove affected seedlings immediately to slow the spread. The 10th mistake is one that stops germination before it ever has a chance to begin, and that is failing to scarify hard-coated seeds. Some seeds come wrapped in a seed coat so tough that water simply cannot penetrate it. Morning glory, nasturtium, sweet pea, lupine, and moonflower all fall into this category. You can plant these seeds in perfect conditions with ideal moisture and temperature, and they will sit there for months without sprouting because water never reached the embryo inside. In nature, these hard coats break down through freeze-thaw cycles, passing through animal digestive systems, or weathering over time. In the garden, we need to help the process along. Scarification means intentionally damaging that outer coat just enough to allow water absorption. The easiest method is to nick the seed coat with a sharp knife or nail clippers on the side opposite the seed eye. Another approach is to rub seeds gently on sandpaper until you see a slightly lighter color beneath the surface. For large batches, soaking in warm water for 12 to 24 hours can soften coats enough to allow germination. Check your seed requirements before planting. If scarification is recommended and you skip it, you could wait an entire season staring at soil where seeds are sitting perfectly preserved but completely dormant just beneath the surface. The 11th mistake seems obvious but catches gardeners every single year, and that is planting at the wrong season. Every crop has a preferred temperature range, not just for germination, but for the entire growing cycle that follows. Planting outside that window sets you up for failure from the start. Cool season crops like lettuce, spinach, and peas planted in summer heat will either fail to germinate or bolt immediately without producing a harvest. Warm season crops like peppers, tomatoes, and squash planted in early spring sit in cold soil, rotting instead of sprouting. This affects all zones, but manifests differently depending on your climate. Northern gardeners get impatient after long winters and plant too early. Southern gardeners sometimes plant fall crops too late or try to push warm season crops into periods of temperature instability. Your seed packets provide guidance, but local knowledge matters even more. Learn your average last frost date and first frost date. Understand that soil warms more slowly than air in spring and cools more slowly in fall. When neighbors who have gardened in your area for decades tell you when they plant, listen carefully. Timing is not about the calendar date. It is about matching your planting to the conditions your specific seeds require to thrive. The 12th fatal mistake happens long before you ever touch soil, and that is poor seed storage before planting. Seeds are living organisms in a state of dormancy, and how you store them directly impacts whether they wake up when you plant them. Heat, humidity, and light are the three enemies of seed viability. A packet of seeds left in a hot garage over summer, stored in a humid basement, or sitting on a sunny windowsill can lose most of its germination potential within a single season. Onion family seeds and other short-lived varieties are especially sensitive, but all seeds degrade under poor conditions. The ideal storage environment is cool, dark, and dry. A sealed container in the refrigerator works excellently for most seeds. Adding a silica gel packet absorbs any residual moisture. Seeds stored this way can often remain viable for years beyond their expected shelf life. Before planting any stored seeds, especially those more than a year old, run a germination test to check viability. The 10 seeds on a paper towel method I mentioned earlier takes minimal effort and tells you exactly what to expect. Many gardeners blame their technique when the real problem is that their seeds never stood a chance because of how they were stored. The 13th mistake is one that gardeners rarely consider, and it catches more people off guard than almost any other on this list. That mistake is losing seeds to birds, rodents, and insects before they ever have a chance to germinate. You direct sow a beautiful row of corn, beans, peas, or sunflowers. You water carefully and wait. Nothing comes up. You assume something was wrong with your technique or the seeds, but the truth is those seeds were eaten within hours of planting. Crows and jays watch gardens and know exactly when large seeds go into the ground. Mice and voles tunnel just below the surface and feast on freshly planted rows. Wireworms and seed corn maggots attack seeds underground where you never see the damage. This is particularly frustrating because there is no evidence left behind. The seeds simply vanish, and you are left troubleshooting a problem that has nothing to do with germination science. For vulnerable large-seeded crops, consider starting transplants indoors where predators cannot reach them. When direct sowing, physical barriers like row cover or bird netting provide protection. Some gardeners plant extra seeds to account for losses, but prevention is more reliable than compensation. If your seeds keep disappearing, think predation before you blame your process. The 14th and final mistake involves a problem that comes from the seeds themselves and that is using treated, hybrid, or non-germinating seeds without understanding what you have. Not all seeds are created equal, and some are simply not meant to produce plants under normal garden conditions. Seeds saved from hybrid vegetables may be sterile or produce plants nothing with. Open pollinated or heirloom varieties and let fruits mature fully before harvesting seeds. When buying seeds, purchase from reputable seed companies rather than bargain bins where storage conditions are unknown. Understanding what kind of seeds you are working with prevents the frustration of perfect technique yielding zero results because the seeds themselves were never going to germinate. And now, for the bonus tip gardeners swear by, and this one genuinely changed my seed starting success rate when I first learned it. Before planting any seed, especially older seeds or varieties known for inconsistent germination, try pre-sprouting them using the coffee filter method. Take a damp coffee filter, spread your seeds across 1/2, fold it over, and slide the whole thing into a sealed plastic bag. Place it somewhere warm, around 70 to 75 degrees for most vegetables. Check daily. Within a few days, you will see which seeds are sending out tiny root tips and which are doing nothing. This tells you instantly whether your seeds are viable without wasting weeks waiting for something that was never going to emerge. Even better, you can transfer only the sprouted seeds to your growing medium, guaranteeing every cell in your seed tray contains a viable plant. This eliminates the guesswork entirely. You stop blaming your technique, stop wondering about soil temperature or moisture levels, and start with seeds you know are alive. It takes 5 minutes to set up and gives you complete confidence before you ever touch potting mix. Thanks for sticking with me through the entire video. If you found this helpful, give it a like, subscribe for more gardening tips, and check out our other videos on growing a better garden.